we live? You are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Interim Times. My name is Michael Ryan, and I'm joined this morning by Mark Vincent and Mark Saywell. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed to my newsletter, Interim Times. It was set up over a week ago, and in the 5 editions that have been issued since then, it has reached a maximum of 1,600 subscribers. So in the first instance, I just want to say thank you to everybody who subscribed. The reason that I set it up, I myself am an interim, as indeed is my colleague Mark Saywell and our friend Mark Vincent. And what I wanted to discuss was the challenges that are going on in the markets during the course of 2024, how tough it's been for the interims to find work, what effect that has on the market itself in terms of the delivery of work and how clients are faring, and what tips interims can do in order to enhance their capability to be hired. And that's basically why I set up the newsletter. And I appreciate, as we all do, busy professionals, 11 o'clock on a Friday, not everybody has the time to break out and join a webinar, but I will be sending the recording to all 1,600 subscribers when I issue the update to the newsletter later on today. And I hope that you find it useful. So that's the reason why I set up. You, by this stage, know who I am. I'm now going to give you an opportunity to meet my two colleagues, Mark and Mark. So I'm going to first of all hand over to Mark Saywell to introduce himself. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself to the subscribers?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody who's watching. I won't say good morning because goodness knows what time it will be when you actually watch it. My name is Mark Saywell. I've worked as a transformation delivery consultant for the best part of 25 years, predominantly covering technology-driven projects, whether it be implementation, whether it be system sourcing, whether it be providing program assurance. I've got a background in Big Four, having worked with Deloitte. I've also worked for Tier 2 contender organisations, helping them to set up some consulting practices. And I've also got experience in multiple industry sectors, helping them to provide the delivery and change management support of their predominantly system-driven projects.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Mark Vincent, would you like to introduce yourself to the subscribers?
I will indeed. So my name is Mark Vincent. I run a company called Applied Change, and we help leaders to achieve their transformation goals, ultimately, change or transformation goals, whatever they may be, whether it's technology, streamlining, consolidation, that kind of thing. And primarily what we do is help them to essentially get people on board and behind those changes, because what I've learned over my 25 years of doing this is that the more people you get on board, the more likely you are to be successful. And typically, the opposite of that, of course, is resistance, which we all know about, but also apathy and general low engagement, which ultimately end up in a very similar place. So it becomes harder for the leader to actually get things done. So my job is to help leaders to navigate their way through that and ultimately deliver better outcomes.
Thank you very much to both of you. I have met and worked with the pair of them over the course of my own career. I met Mark Saywell at Deloitte way back in 2005, and we worked together on several projects and have collaborated since. And I met Mark Vincent similarly on a Deloitte project, although he wasn't working for Deloitte, he was working for the client back in, I think, 2008. So one of the things that I wanted to put across, particularly into the interim group, is the value of long-term relationships and the value of your network. So I would say, just to give you the stats, of the about 1,600 people who subscribe to the newsletter, I reckon approximately 2/3 of them are interims. So they may at some stage be looking for a new role, or they're in role at the moment. And the other third of them are recruiters operating in the interim space. So obviously you need one in order to help the other. And when I issued the first newsletter, I gave you 4 options as to how you were going to obtain work if you were going to become an interim. And the second one is most likely the most popular. It's where you have to interact with the recruitment market in order to secure work. But that makes you, should we say, dependent upon the recruitment market in order to secure your next client. And one of the things that has come up in all of the discussions I've had with my interim peers throughout 2024, and I'm hearing it again and again and again, and I wanted to test it out this morning, is that 2024 is the worst interim market in the careers of any of the people that I've spoken to. And when I issued the newsletter, I was quite surprised at the extent of the response, because I operate 4 to 5 different newsletters across my own consulting business. You might even have subscribed to the Transform Finance with Michael Ryan, because finance transformation is my expertise. But several of the interims reached out to me to give me their experience. And I think there's an awful lot of people out there who think it's a very, very bad market, but they don't know enough other people in the same boat to share their experiences. That's basically what I wanted to discuss this morning, give you a chance to listen to it and give the two guys a chance to chip in with. So my own view on it across 2024 is I pretty much reckon that the market collapsed for about 6 months. I didn't see anything moving. So if you consider that the job opportunities come up inside IR35 and outside IR35, the outside IR35 pure consultant market or pure interim market definitely seemed to dry up for a large portion of the year up to this point in time. If I was to turn it over to you guys, starting first of all with Mark Saywell, what's your impression as an interim of the market during the course of this year?
I would agree completely. I think there's been a few things. So certainly two of the clients that I was actively engaged with coming into the start of 2024, both of them for separate reasons, engaged with, let's call it a strategic review based on global economic circumstances, and that saw them reducing their budgets, reducing their transformation costs, and laying off some of the resources they had in that space, including interim project support. I think since then it's been more of the same in the economic marketplace. A lot of your small medium businesses certainly have tightened the purse strings, certainly in preparation for the general election and understanding of what the economic environment is going to look like post general election. I think many organisations just hunkered down, despite the fact that there is significant need for transformation in a lot of these businesses. We're still in the post-pandemic world. I think most organisations are still adapting to the level of hybrid and remote working that's going on. They need maybe some changes in terms of their resource structures, maybe some changes in their technology in order to support and facilitate it. But just due to the uncertainty in the economy, there's been a great deal of hunkering down. I mean, I have noticed perhaps a little bit more targeted recruitment of full-time resources, but I've also noticed a lot of, again, these SMEs and some of the larger organisations who have taken to at least attempting to try and do a lot of the transformation exercises on a low-cost basis, taking it in-house, which, as we all know, there's a lot of risk that comes with that. I think ultimately it will lead to growth in the interim market down the line when these organisations realise they do need help, or potentially it's a project salvage operation where they need extra expertise to come in. But certainly from what I've seen, the market is struggling, it is depressed. There's been a few other signs I've noticed as well, and I don't know whether Mark's experienced similar. A number of the interim job roles that have been placed on the marketplace, I'm dubious as to their genuine credibility, whether they are actually real roles or not. And again, from some first-hand experience, I've tended to be very used to recruiters almost immediately responding to you as a skilled resource off the back of an advert. I've noticed with a lot of these adverts out there, you'll make contact with the recruiter and be met with stony silence, which isn't really what you regard as a buying sign of a buoyant market that relies on both job roles and talent in order to deliver results. So I think there's certainly signs that the recruiters are, should we say, trying to keep at least visibly active in the market space in readiness for when the market picks up again. But I'm not really seeing any true signs that there is genuine roles currently in the marketplace. That could be seasonal. We are off the back of summer holidays. As I said, certainly we are off the back of quite significant global economic depression and the change of government, which does lead to organisations just hunkering down a bit. But yeah, fingers crossed we still see things picking up in due course.
So I suppose the interesting take out of that was one of the reasons I set up the newsletter was that people could see that they were in the same boat. You're actually suggesting that potentially the jobs are floated, but they're not really there.
Certainly. I think there is an element of that, and I think it's organisations that know that the market is going to pick back up at some point, and want to be seen to have at least a solid presence in that space, whilst in this interim period they're keeping their heads above water with inside IR35 jobs, they still need to be seen as being active in the outside IR35 space, and so are in essence putting placeholder roles out there to demonstrate that they've got credibility in the marketplace, even if the roles don't actually exist. Would certainly be my read on what's going on.
Very interesting point, and certainly one worth sharing across the community. Actually, just as you were saying it, what we should do for balance the next day when we do the second of these webinars is we should invite one of the recruiters on, see things from the other side of the table. But I think that that's a very important point that everyone could acknowledge, that potentially the jobs aren't there and we're chasing phantoms, and basically potentially some of the recruiters are just keeping their flag flying for when the market picks up. Mark Vincent, what would be your take on looking at it as an experienced consultant over the last few years?
Yeah, I guess for me it's slightly different in that I'm not necessarily as close to the interim market per se, but I do have a lot of contacts in that space, such as recruiters I know very well. So typically I'm working one-to-one with leaders in organizations to help them become better at change, so upskilling within the organization. So typically a slightly different model, but what I am seeing is exactly what you've described, Mark, and in the conversations I've had, which is that two things seem to be happening at a macro level, at least. One is, obviously, for all the reasons we know, there is a huge squeeze on budgets. So I think companies essentially, they're concerned about the future, the immediate future anyway. And therefore the immediate reaction always, as we know, we've been around this for a few decades, each of us. So that's what happens, right? You get into that space in the economic cycle where we don't know where it's going to go. So the first reaction is to squeeze budgets. And the reality is that, of course, interims are an easy target in that sense, right? So it's an easy cut, dead easy, right? So it's pretty much instant. No redundancy costs, just cut them out, and therefore, there's an immediate cost save, an immediate hit. I personally think you're right in what you say, that there is an element of this, which is that it's a bit like an instant sugar hit, right? You pay the price later, okay?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that going on, for sure. But ultimately, it comes down to us, right? Because, and maybe I should also remind that, it's sort of relevant, and I'll explain the relevance in a minute, but I don't know if you're aware, but something like 85% of the most successful organizations on the planet were formed in a recession, right? So typically what that does is it forces a sort of different approach, a sort of more innovative approach. And so that's sort of similar to, the interim kind of market, really. So it's incumbent on interims, and of course I count myself in that, in coaching leaders, to really be able to articulate the value you bring, right? Really, really clearly, because in the end, people are buying value, they're buying outcomes, they're buying results. And I think there's been an element of, for many years, the interim market's been buoyant and strong, everything else. So, there's different levels of interim, different levels of experience, right? So the reason you buy us in, frankly, is because you're going to get there quicker. Okay, you can of course go away, you can of course try it, you can of course read all the same stuff, right? Go and read what other people have done. Now we've got obviously AI that can help with a little bit of that as well. It's one thing reading about it, it's one thing understanding it. It's quite another thing actually doing it in practice with real people, real situations, real projects. That's when the experience counts, right? So I think it's incumbent on us actually to really make that point, to help leaders ultimately, because to make the right decision for them, okay? And it really ultimately depends on what it is they're looking for. And I think that sometimes gets a little bit lost in the whole mist of sort of, we need an interim resource. At extreme level, I can remember going back to like 15, almost 20 years now, working for a major bank. We had a huge implementation. I was an interim sort of resource back then. And I remember sitting there on what is not an insignificant amount of money, completely delayed because a related project that I was working on was essentially pushed back something like 6 months. They didn't want to let me go because they knew that when that point came, I was really valuable. But it meant I was essentially just sitting there burning cash, right? And that's not a pleasant experience. And I suspect, that's been the case in some cases. So, when there's a squeeze, this stuff gets cut because it's an easy cut, frankly, and it's incumbent on us to really emphasize to our clients the value of being able to get there quicker, to not make the same mistakes, to not burn the cost that's unnecessary, because we've been there, seen it, right? So we can bring that skill, we can bring that experience.
Okay. So on that point, because actually that was part of the discussion that I was having with Mark Saywell the other day, that in essence, I suppose you could say, I suppose we are slightly biased, that if the better, more experienced, and we are between the three of us, long-term experience in being interims, are not always deployed, then some of the projects are to an extent being delivered potentially to a lesser standard. So what I wanted to pose to Mark Saywell was, if you were a client listening to this, and you have a piece of project work that you've ended up doing yourself internally for whatever reason, what are the potential impacts that you should be considering as a result of the fact that, should we say, you've not deployed the A team, you've not gone out to the interim market? What are some of the things that could trip you up, if not now, immediately, over the next 6, 9, 12 months?
That's a really interesting point, and it could be varied. I mean, there's not a single answer to that. A good practice, a good quality project, there's a significant number of steps that are undertaken that you really need somebody with experience behind the tiller to make sure you're not hitting pitfalls in terms of your project management, in terms of structuring your risks and issues, but managing your risks and issues, in terms of your initial setup of the project, making sure you've got good understandable requirements in place. What is the output, what is the outcome that you're expecting to deliver as a result of the project? Have you got the right kind of toolkit in place to manage your people? The amount of times that I've seen, certainly from technology projects, that people think they're just putting in a piece of software and that's it. You're putting in a tool for your people to use, and if you don't consider it as a change management exercise, you're already on a pathway that's going to be very difficult to recover from. Now, I get it, right? Again, like Mark said, we're in a time of economic pressure, and I get that one of the first areas that people look to try and save cost is in the use of interims, but there does need to be understanding in that could actually come with significant risk to the delivery of your project. Now, there are other means that mean you don't need to necessarily, with immediate effect, bring in an interim. We're not here just to bemoan the world and woe is us. It's a depressing time at the moment. There are other options that people can look to engage with. That could be something like a second opinion. If you're running a project and you want to continue running it in-house as best as possible, perhaps engage an experienced resource to come in and do a little bit of assurance, to give you a once over, assess whether you're on the right pathway, to give you hints and tips as to how you can potentially continue. Ultimately, that might then lead to you considering the resource blend on your project and considering whether you might need to bring somebody in at a later point in time. It might not. It might just at least give you the steps that you need in order to pull through and recover from. There are a number of pitfalls in every project. That's why people like us exist. And it'd be very difficult to try and give a summary of the kind of pitfalls that can be encountered when it's plethora. On a technology project, it's hardware, it's software, there's people, there's integrations, there's just so much that I can't do justice to in a 5 minute piece here. But there are options that are available to organizations. I said engage with expertise if you are doing something in-house, just to make sure that you remain on the rails, that you have a decent plan of action that you might be able to continue with on your own in-house, or it might just give you that little shake up that actually you do need a little bit of extra expertise on the ground on a day-to-day basis in order to give you the success that your project can benefit from. The key downfalls that you might encounter without getting things right, overruns, always the key. I mean, the majority of projects overrun anyway. And if you try and do a project without experienced resources on hand, the opportunity and likelihood of overruns grow significantly. Additional costs because the scope wasn't defined correctly up front, especially if you're working with a third-party provider. You agree a price up front for the delivery of the project. The moment you make a change to that scope, the costs grow out of control. And again, having that expertise on hand early in the project, or as early as possible in the project, to get your hands around the scope, to understand that you're delivering the right thing for your organization is vital. And I think that's really the key, in a summary form, the key risks that you face running a project without the right level of expertise on hand. It's
Right.
as much as it seems a sensible thing to do in the short term to try and save cost, in the long run, you could actually be setting yourself up for cost failure, that your costs are going to grow out of hand, that the time and length of the project could grow out of hand because you don't necessarily have the experience in-house who understands how these projects run, who understands the pitfalls of these projects, that something that seemed an economically sound decision here and now could actually hurt you adversely in the long run.
Okay, so in terms of what I was hearing from you there was 2 points that resonated with me. The first was the assurance piece, that as clients, in essence, are potentially looking at internal solutions to deliver projects for cost reasons, that shouldn't preclude them from coming to an interim to give them a program assurance second opinion piece, which is always, shall we say, a shorter piece of work, and then by extension a cheaper piece of work to give you some reassurance on the direction of travel you're heading in. And the second thing I took out of what you said there was when you mentioned the words change management. In my entire experience, change management is the piece that people want to avoid on programs because it's the toughest thing to deliver, and is actually a skill set which is not necessarily found in BAU staff, but is typically found in consultants. And those two areas for me came out of, if you want to go ahead with doing this internally, you don't want to bring in external interim resource at this stage, you should be seriously considering getting a short-term second opinion, and you should be considering in the specialist area of change management, what does it really take to deliver part of your program, even if it's not all being delivered externally. Mark Vincent, what are your thoughts with regards to the potential long-term impact of the current interim market?
Yeah, sort of related to that, one of the trends that I'm seeing is that certainly the change management skill set is more and more being recruited in-house, whether it's called project management, change management, program management, all sort of kind of related, but with some distinctions. So that is definitely seemingly happening from what the conversation I've been having in the interim space. Regardless of how you get there, right? So I think you're absolutely right, Michael. We know from experience, right? The technology, of course, has to be good, but you can have relatively substandard technology and a great team, and you'll achieve fantastic results. Okay. Yeah. You can also have some of the best technology in the world. I was listening to a client yesterday with implementing one of the world-leading ERPs, let's say, and they are currently something like 4 times over budget and 7 years late. They're still going, right? Ouch. That's got nothing to do with the technology, because that technology, I can tell you now, has been implemented in many, many different places. And I know the client very well, and I know why they're struggling. And it's all down to people. It's all down to lack of adoption, lack of buy-in, lack of pretty much everything. So from my point of view, whether we call it change management, which I think is kind of an unfortunate term in many ways, because another problem that I've seen, another reason that these skill sets are being cut from the sort of the budgets, if you like, is that frankly leaders don't understand what they are and what they deliver, and that's down to people like us, right, to bring that case and say, well, actually, what it is this. And so ultimately, when you think about it, what it is ultimately is how you're going to get the thing delivered and how you're going to get the benefits out of it. And that's ultimately where it goes. And so rather than talking about change management, I think what we need to be talking about is, how are you going to really make sure you get the levels of adoption you're looking for? How are you really going to get the sort of levels of engagement throughout? How are you going to get the levels of innovation that you're looking for? Because the common mistake, and if there's one thing that our sort of listeners should take away from this, is that I actually heard this conversation yesterday, or had a conversation yesterday along these lines, which is the mistake is thinking that when people accept change, and you've done your job. Yeah, when they accept that change is happening, you've done your job. And that's where the mistake lies, right? Because it isn't. Because when people accept things, what they'll typically do is the minimum. What they'll typically do is what they feel they have to do. And guess what? Lives are busy. People have got full email boxes. They've got full meeting schedules. They will get distracted, right? There's a whole difference between accepting a change and feeling driven to make it happen, to feel compelled to get to a future. And it's that little space that takes a project or program or change or whatever you want to call it, from being something that's going to drag along, that as a leader you're going to have to push and push and push and push, to something that goes faster than you expect and something that actually delivers more than you expect. Okay, it's that space between acceptance and ultimate drive and determination to make it a success.
Right.
And I've seen both.
So,
and I've actually been in charge of both. And trust me, there's a world of difference between one and the other.
right.
And it's that space where I think we can add the most value.
Right. And actually, in all of your contributions so far, one of the things that's coming through for me is, and one of the reasons why I set up the newsletter is I'm not a great believer in moaning about something. I want to see some positivity. I want to see some action. I want to see us dealing with a problem. You know, I want to see us coming at it in innovative ways. What you're hitting upon through both of your contributions so far is the interims have a responsibility to explain what for some people can be slightly nebulous concepts, change management, change adoption, to explain this in a manner which basically busy finance leaders and business leaders in general can take on board and go, right, I get it. I understand what I need to do. I see the value of an interim in this particular engagement. I'll deploy the resource. Or otherwise, because I don't necessarily grasp the concepts, it's like, well, I don't know what I don't know. So it's okay for my internal project management team to just keep doing this, even if they're not familiar with some of the, should we say, key points of running a finance transformation program as an example. So let's move this conversation on from, I think we've accepted that the market is, like, common consensus, let's say it's low. Whether it's the worst we've ever seen, possibly, could be. There are some things that the interims themselves as a community can be doing to present ourselves better. So when both of you, and I have my own experiences in this, when you go to market, how do you present yourselves? How do you put across what it is, the value that you bring? Because what I found when I flicked through the job titles of the 1,600 people who subscribed, they're confused between, can I put down 16 different things that I do on LinkedIn so I can be found? And can I succinctly explain to somebody else in 6 seconds what I do? And there's a fair disparity in those from what I've seen just through the subscribers themselves. So how well do you pitch, or how do you even recommend that somebody pitches what is their true interim expertise? Which one of you would like to, Mark Saywell?
I think that's a $64,000 question right there. And I've got to be completely honest, I think it's still something that I'm learning and developing in myself as time goes by. So I think, you know, a lot of interims tend to just rely on maybe a established relationship with maybe a single recruitment consultant. I think others try and broaden their scope a little bit. Certainly from an outside IR35 perspective, I think one of the most important things I realized was the need to have a website that at least gives that outward appearance that you're more than just a resource that's going to go and sit in a person's organization for, 40 hours a week or whatever it may be for a period of time. You need to have that clear identity that at least shows that you're more than just that interim in order to convince the tax man that you're not inside the IR35 scope. But that in and of itself, there's not really many organizations that are out there that then look at a website in terms of selecting their future candidate. Most organizations will realize that they've got maybe a unique problem. They're not really out there looking for a consultancy firm or a consultancy organization, or indeed a consultant to fill a role. They are looking for a specific role, and I think the presentation of yourself within that specific role is perhaps key. So if you're in the project management space, making sure that you're hitting those particular notes around project management, that you're picking up the main toolkits that you're using, that they're evident and present on your profile is quite important. Making sure that the experience of those is front and center on your CV as well. I mean, I don't know whether other people do the same, but I don't have one single CV. I have a CV per role, depending on the roles that are available in the market. I will fully tailor my CV to the role that I'm going for, to make sure that I'm hitting all of those contents. But again, that comes down to me hunting the role out. And when it comes to being headhunted, it is a much bigger challenge. It is much harder to have people come to you than for you to find roles and go for them. And I said, it's something I'm still looking into myself and developing and progressing myself. But the key really tends to be make it easy for them. Make sure that you are sized and shaped with the buzzwords that they're looking for. That you're active in the right kind of spaces for those people as well. You know, there are plenty of community groups on LinkedIn. Make sure you're visible in there. Make sure you're using the right hashtags in any particular post that you're putting out there. So you're hitting the keynotes. Some little thought pieces in that space can be useful as well to demonstrate that you're there and in the right kind of space. But it's challenging. You've got to be busy. It's almost a full-time job in and of itself when you're not with client to go looking for a role. And I think you need to be in that kind of headspace and mentality. You need to be producing thought pieces. You need to be active in the community groups where people may be looking for a role. You've got to be having conversations with recruiters, because you can't do everything on your own. You do need help in that right kind of market space in order to find opportunities. But you just
there's an interesting thing there in what you were saying. When I wrote the first edition of the newsletter, I think I made clear that it's not necessarily the best people who get the jobs. And I actually got some interesting response to that. I said, no, it's not the best people who get the jobs. It doesn't matter whether you think you're the best. It's the people who get found get the jobs.
Absolutely.
That's how this works. And I find and I do put this across quite strongly, because people come to me for career advice all the time. And they come to me to ask me, should they be an interim? And I always advise anybody who's sort of middle to latter middle age, settled with family and commitments, who's not used to not knowing where they're going to be from Monday to Friday on their laptop on their Mac, that they shouldn't do it, that they should just stay in permanent employment. Because there's two skills required to be an interim. There's the delivery piece that everybody grasps, and there's the second piece that everybody goes, well, someone else is going to do that for me. And that part is business development. That's the part where you have to self-promote. That's the part where you have to put your shyness in your back pocket and tell the world what you do. And this is very, very important. And I see people who, I know they're extremely good, but they're sat there with no clients.
Yeah.
Because
I think there's another dimension on that. Sorry, I think there's another dimension on that as well, Michael. I don't know what your thought. Then again, maybe something that Mark's got some thoughts on as well. I think when times can be quiet, there can be some risk for an interim that they grab at an opportunity because it's there, and it may be an opportunity that maybe is outside of their skill set, or worse still, I think in some areas there's a little bit of price gouging going on. So there seems to be some opportunities out there that do look like they potentially are real opportunities, but the seniority of the job spec and the personal risk that can be undertaken by the person taking that role on doesn't seem to be commensurate with the very low day rates that are being offered. Now, there will inevitably be somebody out there who gets desperate enough that they take the role, but they need to be asking the question of, is the day rate really worth the personal risk that they're taking by taking that role on? If, number one, they don't actually have the level of experience that's needed for the role, and number two, whether they've actually really understood the level of potential risk to their reputation that they may face by taking that role on.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I'm going to bring Mark Vincent in just a second, but just to follow up on that for a second, there is I don't think that the majority of interims take seriously risk assessing the jobs that they're offering. And there are occasions I have turned down work. I either considered the client or the scenario to be too risky, and it wasn't worth what was being offered, or it wasn't worth the risk of attempting to do it because it was all pitched wrong. Many of the jobs are pitched wrong in terms of how they're explaining what they want you to do and the level at which they report in order, which inevitably does drive their success. And I'll come back to some of the things that the interims need to do in order to present themselves and to position themselves more. But I'd like to just bring Mark Vincent back in on the conversation at this point. Mark, have you any thoughts, having listened to the last few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ultimately what we need to do is get ourselves into a service mindset, because it is really about what the client's looking to gain or to get, and potentially what it is that's stopping them getting what it is they want to get, right? So our job is to help them remove those roadblocks so they get there faster, easier, less stressful, whatever the thing is, right? Because there's a reason they've got us in, and that is they have a problem.
Yeah.
They have a problem to solve, because otherwise they'd solve it themselves, wouldn't they? Ultimately.
Yes.
And that, I think, is the antidote to whether it's day rate or whatever. Now I just pointed at a client that's 3 times over budget, and that, just to put that in context, that means they have spent 200 million implementing an ERP solution, currently, and 7 years late, and they still haven't got the value off the back of it. Now, without putting too fine a point on it, getting the right kind of support in there, helping them to get people on board, all of a sudden you've just inoculated yourself against any day rate that we would even remotely consider charging, frankly. And that is the reality. That is the reality that people are in, and they're in it right now, and they will be in it in years to come, right? But what we're maybe guilty of not doing is articulating that well enough, and also, ultimately helping them to get trust in us, because that's really where it comes from, right? So there's 2 things. One is the value gap big enough to warrant, getting someone like us in to help them, and the second one is, of course, do they trust the skills that we've got, the experience we've got to be the right answer for them? And if you get those things right, then whoever you are as an interim, the conversation with clients then becomes that much easier.
There was something when we held one of the conferences last year that you said that I repeatedly come back to in some of the conversations I hold, particularly with internal project managers who don't have vast experience across multiple clients and multiple scenarios. And that's that I think you told me it was 95% of all major change programs are delivered either late or over budget. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a big, so for those who are interested in the data, there's a guy called Ben Flyvier who works as part of the Oxford Business School. And they have probably one of the most comprehensive databases on project performance that exists currently, that we're aware of, and the Association of Project Management, the Change Management Institute, both of which I'm an active part of, all talk about this kind of problem. McKinsey have been quoting the 70%, what they call failure rate, for years. Now, the reality is it's nuanced, okay? It's not that is true, but what is true is that the vast majority go over budget. And I think Bent's work pointed to the fact that something like, if you look at sort of the typical measures of project performance, which are schedule and budget. Now, I would argue they're not necessarily the smartest, okay? But that's a whole different discussion. But let's just take that those are the ones that organizations work to, because they have the annual budgeting cycle and therefore it fits and everything else, right? So something like 93% of projects and programs go over budget. Now, if you add into that, then, sort of, if you like, the on time, on budget, and delivering the benefits expected at the beginning, something like less than 5% of projects and programs actually achieve that. Now, of course, not all of that is down to sort of a mismanagement or anything else. But what I can tell you is the vast majority, and the studies consistently point at, the vast majority that do go late, go over budget, and deliver short on benefits are down to really a lack of true engagement of the workforce behind it. And that is costing organizations an awful lot of money and opportunity, of course, because the more you do that, the more you slip behind, the more likely you are to be usurped by competition. And we are, as I've seen, through, and you, Michael, have seen it as well in music, what we experienced back in the 2000s with the major disruption due to just the internet back then, online business. The whole difference, and we're seeing this right now, okay, in terms of like the AI and various other technologies that are all converging. We are in a disruptive world. So, that means that organizations are having to adapt more and more quickly, which is, I think, why they're tending to bring those change resources in-house. So need is still there. The question that we have to address with clients is whether whether we're doing a good enough job in articulating the value of the experience that we have to help them get what they want faster, easier, with less stress, etc., etc. So that's the ultimate question.
On that point, actually, just to bring it back to Mark Saywell for a minute, in terms of your typical interim, so both you and I have worked within the Big Four, but we've also worked in what I would call the regular businesses as well. So we've seen this from both sides of the table. Do you think there's an extent to which consultants talk in a language that the clients don't understand?
Absolutely. I think that can be a key pitfall. And again, I can hold my hands up on this one as having been in consulting for, well, I'd say at least 20 of my 25 years working experience. When you're living and breathing certain terminology on a day-to-day basis, you can start to convince yourself that that's the same language as experienced out in the real world of industry, shall we say. And I think it's important to make sure that you're hitting the right kind of resonance when you're, there you go, there's a buzzword there, resonance, right kind of words when you're talking to prospective clients. And again, I think actually focusing on their need and their need when looking to provide the services you're looking to provide can be important. And again, I'll reflect on one of the points I mentioned earlier on. We were talking about how it can be quite important to make sure clients stay on track with their projects. We talked about project assurance, which is a great word. And I mean, again, when you hobnobbing in the world of consultancy, everybody knows what project assurance means. But if you were to speak to a normal client in industry who is implementing a new ERP or maybe changing their back office finance team in order to deliver some of the economic benefits from that, if you go in there and mention project assurance to them, they probably haven't got the first clue what you're talking about. But they may well still be in a situation where they want a second opinion, or they want to understand if their project is gearing towards success. And I think there is that danger there that you've got clients who have got very specific needs, who are actually desperate for help, resources who are out there who have the skill set to help them. And when it comes to that whole dating game of getting the right resource into the right business,
they're not talking the same language.
They're both fishing in the wrong pools, and there's probably an opportunity to kind of encourage those two dimensions together. I think if somebody could hit on the formula to make that particular dating game successful, that's probably a $1 million idea there and then. It's
interesting because I'd say through my entire career, the terminology which I would have come out of working for Deloitte and Logica for between them about 8 years is not typically what your business as usual finance director uses to explain his problems or how he would go about fixing them. And I think it's incumbent upon us, as I think Mark Vincent was alluding to through most of this conversation, for us to be the translation in that language. So to take what are the typical problems of a business and translate that into a language that someone can understand. So everybody can understand the fact that you're getting a second opinion. They don't always, as you quite rightly point out, resonate what assurance means. And it's down to us to put this across in, I would say, layman's terms, but in straightforward language, which goes, well, I know what I'm getting, I know what I'm asking for. And also to put some context around that, because I always give the example of the feasibility study. Most people say to me, what's a feasibility study? Well, then we break it down and say, well, it's a business case. Do you actually have a case to run a project or not? Do you have a problem that's worth fixing? Can you fix it in a manner which is suitable to your business? And the language, if we don't get the language right, someone isn't obviously going to buy it or employ someone to do it. But if we talk about it in terms of it takes, on average, about 3 to 4 months to develop a business case for a medium to large size business. For perspective for everybody listening to this, to give you a second opinion, to give you assurance, is obviously only a fraction of that time. And on average, what I've found is it's never more than a quarter of the time or resource that was necessary to create the deliverable in the first place, which says, this is what we're going to do. Because what the second opinion is going to do is it's going to challenge something which has been already created. The time frame is wasted, not wasted, but invested in creating the first deliverable in the first place. So bridging that gap and making consultancy more easier to grasp for everybody, using terminology such as second opinion and in other examples as well, would greatly help us in positioning ourselves for work. But I also think that the clients themselves need to view consultancy as not being staged, set piece 6 to 12 month engagements. You should be able to talk to a consultant the same way you talk to your doctor. So when we recently launched the program clinics where somebody could take a half a day of our time and talk to somebody who was an organizational expert, a change management expert, or a business systems expert, because they were quite happy running the program themselves internally, but they had something nagging away at the back of their mind. And they don't need us for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in order to address that, but they want to tap into our experience. And naturally enough, we wish to place value on that. So it's not just a case of ensuring that the language is shared and translatable for all. It's also about packaging what consulting is and making it more accessible. We have a responsibility to do that as well. And that's where myself and Mark Saywell came with the program clinics that we came up with, where clients could take a half a day of our time to discuss both organizational and system changes. Mark Vincent, you wanted to jump back in?
Yeah, I think the language, if you like, gap is really, really important. And I think, I mean, it's not just something. It's something that we will have almost certainly fallen into at various points, unwittingly. But the thing is, even the leaders in organizations do the same thing. I was in a conversation the other day asking, just asking big open questions. So this strategy that you have, right, which has got lots of streams and projects and things running in it, just explain to me in less than 30 seconds, assuming that in fact, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, okay? And you've got 30 seconds, we're in a lift, and you're going to explain to me what the purpose of that group of things that you're working on is. Very senior person in the organization, literally, it was like a rabbit in the headlights moment. He said, I don't, and I said, well, there's the problem right there, because if you want to get a whole bunch of people behind an idea, you need to be able to explain it in language that they're prepared to listen to. And that's true of us with our client, and it's also true of the client with their own people, okay? That's one of the biggest challenges with any change or transformation, is that actually people haven't got a clue what's going on. As a consequence, what they do is they say, well, we've got all this stuff that I have to do, but I don't know why I have to do it. Okay, it's like it's like trying to get your kids to put their shoes away, right? It's the same principle. If they don't understand why it's important, and feel the consequences of when they go and try and find their shoes because they're running late, that they can't because they haven't put them away, we start to get the consequences. In the case of organizations, the consequences are if we don't change, it looks like this, and if we do change, there's actually a really nice soft landing to go to. Okay. In layman's terms, in really, really simple language. And if you think you've got it really simple, take it down a notch again. Okay, make it as simple as you can. And I think a lot of the times, we're all guilty of this. And I see this happening time and time again in leadership roles, especially at the exec level, where there's a sort of a lexicon that they're using. They take that out to market, to their people, confuse everyone, switch everyone off, and then wonder why they've got acceptance but not sort of proper commitment and drive to actually get it done. And that's I guess what I'm pointing at here is a big problem for consultants and for leaders in general.
So it's interesting, we've been talking for just about 50 minutes. We started off with the market is dreadful. We started off with potentially phantom jobs. We started off with there's a glut of consultants on the market because the bigger firms have been letting people go. But actually, what we've ended up learning out of this session is the interims themselves, we as a community have a responsibility to get our value proposition right. And even using the phrase value proposition leads us to the second thing that we need to get right, which is the language that we use so that us and the clients are discussing what's a problem and what's a solution. in simple layman's terms so that we all get it. And
Yeah.
I followed on from that.
Sorry, Michael, just to
What?
pick on that term alone, because just to highlight a point, right? You've used the term value proposition, which is a default term that we would use. Okay.
Yes.
Now, the real question is, if I'm a buyer, what are you going to do for me and how much is it going to cost? That's what they want to know, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to do for me and how much is it going to cost? That's the words we need to be using, right? What are we going to do for them? And why is it well worth them spending money with us? What are they going to gain from it, right? And ultimately, that's it. You know, and this is a classic trap. When don't get me wrong, I do this all the time, right? I'll use those kinds of words, and then you have to check yourself, and you go, okay, is the person I'm talking to really getting this? How can I make this even more direct, even more in their face? And the answer is put yourself in their shoes. Imagine you were them, going, well, what would I ask? What would I care about? Yeah. If I'm going to spend 50p and get £1 back, well, the only next question is how many times can I spend 50p, right? Yeah.
So it's language, and language, really. That's what it comes. It's back to Mark's analogy about the dating game. What pool are you in? How are you presenting yourself? How are you attracting what you want? So there's an awful lot more for interims to be considering here than just what their LinkedIn profile photo looks like. There's an awful lot, vastly more depth to it than that. Mark, have you any comments, Mark Saywell, that you'd like to wrap up on as we head towards the hour?
I think it's been a really useful session. Thoroughly enjoyed talking through. I think the main takeouts that I would suggest for somebody who's been watching is really give consideration to how you are addressing yourself to the marketplace. What are your skill sets? What are your competencies? And following that up with the bit we just talked about here, once you've understood and determined what your skills and competencies are, think about what that means to the outside market. How are you actually going to present that? How are you going to make sure that it's understandable to anybody other than just yourself? Because you do need somebody who is going to actually say, yeah, that's the person for us. That this person is the answer to our exam question. And I think the second point is you don't underestimate how much work you need to do in order to find that next role. Because to one of the points that Mark's just made, you may need to actually educate your target market in helping them understand what answer you're giving and also how their exam question is being interpreted. So, sometimes the right role for you could be sat there, but the terminology that's been used doesn't necessarily chime with you. So don't necessarily, take no for a first answer, shall we say. If you see a job role on there that could be in the right space for you, ask some questions about it and do some of the legwork in making sure that translation is correct, so that you're not writing off that golden opportunity because the initial language it's written in doesn't necessarily chime. I think that's probably the main points that I would close on today. Okay.
And Mark Vincent?
I think the final reflection, I suppose, and it's the same with when you're selling a transformation to a group of people, is to remember that remember why we buy things as humans. Okay, if you think about anything you buy, anything sort of material, if you like, houses, cars, and all that kind of thing, ultimately the buy is an emotional process. Okay, and we miss this. We tend to go with the logic, the rational side of things, and of course there is a rational component to this. But it's in this order. It's emotion first, rational second. And it doesn't matter who you are, that's the way it works. And so if we're not really getting people to feel the sort of emotional reason why they should engage us, then ultimately they're going to stay as they are. And the ultimate reason, the emotional reason is they've got a problem and we are the best way to help them solve that problem. And the minute that clicks with them, then the next conversation is an easy one.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So for all of you listening live, or the 1,600 of you that will receive it when I send this out via the newsletter later on today, I hope you found something useful in the course of the conversation. As I said, when I set up the newsletter, my intention was people would share their experience so they don't feel that they're alone in some of the challenges that they face. But really and truly, since I'm not particularly focused on challenges, I prefer to focus on solutions. What I want is to put you in a position where you can learn from other people who've done things successfully or who've actually just been an interim for an awful lot longer and therefore have experiences to share. and that there is a cycle to these things. You'll have good times and bad times, but there are things that you should always be consistently doing so that you're in the mix and you can be found for the roles that you're looking for. So I think one of the things that I'll do for the next session is I'll invite on a LinkedIn expert. So because the majority of the dating, shall we say, for this process takes place on LinkedIn, I'll invite on a LinkedIn expert, give you an overview as to how you should set up your profile. I get various mixed messages as to how that should be done, so we might as well hear it from someone who lives and breathes it. I'll see if the recruiter is interested in participating in the flip side of this conversation. But the other thing I'll do, particularly with Mark Saywell, is I want to illustrate to my fellow interims that you can develop a new solution. You can call it a new proposition, whatever you want to call it, new proposition, new solution, and bring it to market and how you can do that. And we've been introducing new solutions over the course of the last 2 or 3 months or so. And we have another one in the pipeline, which should be out by the end of next week, which builds upon an awful lot of what you've just heard in this conversation. Not deliberately, because we haven't briefed Mark Vincent on what the actual solution is. But it'll be interesting to see how all of that gels together. So from my perspective, thank you for following the newsletter. Please, by all means, share the newsletter, share the video as you see fit. Chime in with your comments when you've had a chance to look at it. We do appreciate busy professionals are not free at 11 o'clock in the morning to be participating in webinars. That's fine. Put your comments in afterwards. Share the newsletter. If you have any suggestions, let me know on any topics you want to talk about. And now that we have, in our case, fully tested the use of the webinar facility and live streaming it to LinkedIn at the same time, we will expand upon far more conversations over the coming weeks and months. So thank you very much is all I can say. Thank you to both of my guests. And I look forward to continuing the discussion the next time. All the best. Michael.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
So